Hey everybody, Navster here. Today I'm going to talk to you about that never-ending quest to go ultralight and just shed a few more ounces and the mistake that I made. Although it does come with a price, I'll admit every time I see a new piece of gear that weighs less than what I currently have, I get all googly-eyed, I research it, do all types of analysis and think I've got to have that piece of gear. So when I decided to hike the Pacific Crest Trail in 2019, I figured, you know what? There's not as much rain on the PCT as compared to the AT. There's lots of stars in the sky. And why don't I change my tent to a tarp and a bivy? So that's what I did. I purchased a tarp, I purchased a bivy, and I went out, did one little training overnight camp, just one, and I knew immediately that it was not for me. It was not worth the 7.5 ounces that I saved from carrying my tent. So I'll cover the 4 things that led me to buy the tarp and the bivy, and then I'll cover the 4 things that took me back to my tent. Although I am looking at the Zpacks Plexamid, no one tell my wife. So the first of the 4 things that made me want to buy the tarp, weight, of course. That was the primary characteristic that I looked at. So I previously had the Zpacks Duplex tent. Now when I bought it, I think Zpacks, I'm pretty sure, showed that it weighed 21 ounces. Right now on the website it shows 19 ounces. But for my comparison purposes, I used 21 because that's what it was when I purchased. So I ultimately settled on one brand for both, Mountain Laurel Designs. They've got a ton of respect at good quality products in the industry. The tarp that I bought was the MLD Patrol tarp, and it weighs in at a whopping 6.5 ounces. The bivy was the Bug Bivy 2. It has a little bit of protection on the sidewalls. Still has a pretty large bug netting component all along the top. It comes in at 7 ounces. So overall, I was saving 7.5 ounces, almost half a pound for my tent setup. The other factor that I looked at was packability. I previously packed my Zpacks Duplex on top of my backpack. That way it was always there when I needed it. Right when I got to camp, it was the first thing I did, which I like that. But it's pretty sizable. You know, it doesn't roll down as compact as the tarp and the bivy combination. The tarp and the bivy, they're so small. They just, you could hold them in your hand, basically, kind of squeeze them up in your hand. And, you could put them inside your pack just like your jacket or your sleeping clothes, anything like that. They just kind of crumple up and you shove them down in there and they work very well for packability. The third item that I looked at was something that would give me kind of options for cowboy camping. So with the Zpacks Duplex, when you're in the tent, you're in the tent. There's no laying there looking up at stars like I've been dreaming to do on the PCT. You can kind of see through the tent, and if there's a bright sun or bright moon above you, then you're definitely going to see that, but you won't see stars. So with the tarp and bivy setup on nice nights, without the tarp, I could just use the bivy and look straight up at the stars. So that was intriguing with the tarp and bivy setup. The 4th item was just the idea of having, this adventurer spirit. You see folks out there on the trail that are under tarps or just in a bivy. They look like they know what they're doing. They look like they're, the mountain man or mountain woman out there having a good time, loving the outdoors. So, that added to me wanting to get the tarp and the bivy. So, I took the tarp out, as I mentioned, for one night, set it up. And there's 4 reasons why I ultimately sold both of them. And now I'm going to use my Zpacks Duplex for the PCT. The first of those was the time to set up. Now, when I originally bought my Duplex, I actually bought their pole kit. I was familiar with tents that were freestanding. I was a little afraid of only having stakes for a tent. So I bought their pole kit. I used that for the first 30 miles on the Appalachian Trail. By the time I got to mountain crossings, I sent those poles back home. I've never used them again. And, once you put up the tent with the stakes, you get pretty good at it, and it goes by very quickly. And one thing about the Duplex, once it's up, I mean, I've had it in rainstorms and windstorms, in the White Mountains, and you just kind of laugh at the storm. It holds up very well. Of course, it keeps the water off of you and so on, but it's quick to go up and protects you very well. There's no question about it. Each of these 4 items that I like about having a tent, and in particular the duplex, the opposite of these is really why I don't like the tarp. So the tarp and the bivy setup for me took a lot longer. Yes, I've only done it once, but I just did not like the setup process. After using the stakes to set up the tarp, in essence, I was only halfway through. I still had the bivy to set up, assuming you're going to use its 4 stakes to set it up. So I didn't feel that it went up as quickly. If you don't want the bivy hanging down in your face, of course, then you got to hook the strings to the underside of the tarp. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but all in all, when you set up the duplex, it's ready to go. There's no, tweak this, move this, set up a bivy, etc. So setup time for me was a huge win for the tent. Also, when setting up the tarp and the bivy, one thing that I did not like is that the poles that hold up the 2 ends of the tarp are in the center of the tarp. Now, when I set up my tent, let's say on a slightly slanted ground, I do it in such a way that if I slide, I'm going to do it so that I slide to my feet, right? I don't want to slide sideways. I don't want to slide, in my direction of my head. So I'm going to slide in my foot direction. So with the tarp and the bivy, I did the same thing. That's the way I want to slide if I'm going to have to slide. But in this case, you slide right into your pole that's holding up the tarp. And twice, the one time I used it, that pole fell over, and therefore the tarp laid down on top of my legs. So just not something I wanted to have to deal with. The second item was having room to move in the tent. In a duplex, yes, it's a 2-person tent, but it has so much room. You can go in there, have gear on one side, sleep on the other side, however you want to do that, tons of room to move around, lay there, read your phone, read a book, whatever it is you want to do in your tent, do personal hygiene, etc. Change clothes. All of that's very easy inside of a tent. In the bivy tarp setup, your bivy is basically the size, a little bigger than your sleeping bag or your quilt. And so everything's very tight and compact. You don't have a lot of room to move. If you wanted to do, hygiene or, wash your calves off, stretch your feet, change clothes before you go to sleep, change clothes in the morning before you hike. All that is very difficult, in my opinion, when you're in the bivy. And to be honest with you, I don't really know where I would do it. Maybe it would get easier to do in the bivy, but I just didn't see it happen. The third item that I really like for the duplex is the ease of getting in and out. It has 2 doors, one on either side. The poles, even though they are in the middle of each of the openings, they really don't get in your way. There's plenty of room to move in and out there. And you don't have to climb over someone else if you're there, in the tent with them. It's really like you've got a front door to your house, right? I usually set my knee pad, my Thermarest sit pad down in front of the door and use that for my knees if I'm crawling out or if I'm just going to put my butt out and then stand up. It works great. A lot easier to get in and out than a bivy. Going under the tent, like if you have going under the tarp, if you have that set fairly low to protect against wind or rain, I don't know how to get out of that easily. You're crawling on your hands and knees. Because of the patrol tarp, the way it's set up, it has a beak on the head end. And then when you're crawling out, your back is up against the beak, and in my experience, it pulled up the stakes more than once. So it was just not easy to get in and out, and not a fan. Getting in and out of the tarp is one thing, and then you still haven't yet gotten inside or out of the bivy. So you have like 2 processes that you have to do there. And the fourth item related to the tent that I think is great is what I call, the gear explosion. there's no concern about pulling out all of my gear, letting it air out inside the tent, especially the duplex. There's tons of room in there. I can just pull it all out, throw it all around if I wanted to. I usually stay fairly organized, but it just gives me that option. Whereas with the Bivy and the tarp, I'm not a fan of throwing my gear out all over the ground outside of my tent. So when I'm in the Bivy, I don't really know where to put it. My gear, my pack for sure can't fit in the Bivy with me. Some of my gear pieces can, so I have to decide, okay, which things do I want in my Bivy with me throughout the night versus in my pack. And then the pack, if you want to keep it out of the weather, it's going to need to be under the tarp, but it falls over, lays completely on the dirty, wet ground, whatever. Maybe it falls over onto the Bivy. So it's just not the perfect setup for me. Maybe the Bivy and the tarp are best for, 2 or 3 day events where you may not have a lot of gear, or the weather's going to be nice. I don't know. If I could spare an extra $600, maybe I would keep them. But ultimately, for those 4 reasons, I decided that the tent was right for me, and I sold the Bivy and the tarp. Don't get me wrong, they were great products, high quality, extremely light. The service from Mountain Laurel Designs was awesome. And, if you're into tarps and Bivies, in my opinion, those are the ones to go for. So I hope this helps if you're making decisions around tent versus tarp and Bivy, or if you're looking for ways to cut weight. From my experience, going to the tarp and Bivy are just not the right answer for cutting that weight. You really have to like the lifestyle of a tarp and Bivy setup to go with it. So thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like this. Click the notifications bell, and I'll see you out there on the trail. Later.